This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to the Women's Agenda podcast. I'm here in the studio with Georgie Dent. How are you, Georgie?
Very well, thank you.
And also Anne-Marie Elias. How are you, Anne-Marie?
I'm very well, thank you.
Our 2017 Agenda Setter of the Year.
Oh, yay!
Yeah. So Anne-Marie did take out the award for the Agenda Setter of the Year at our Women's Agenda Leadership Awards, and I say that as a bit of a shameless plug to remind you to nominate for the Leadership Awards because it does close very soon. Thank you for being here, Anne-Marie. You've been in the studio a couple of times since then. We always value your contribution and love to have you in here as well.
Thank you so much.
I should say you've also got a very sore pinky finger. She happened to cut
is dangerous.
a part of it off over
People,
and looks like
be
it will be
careful when
okay.
you're chopping your vegetables.
Yes, exactly. A lesson for all of us. So today we are talking a little bit about women's sport and why it is so important, and asking the question of what the AFLW is doing looking to shorten the season. And Georgie has just written a great story about that, which we'll talk about soon. Also about She E-World, which involves a group of 500 women supporting female entrepreneurs that has just launched in Australia. So we want to talk about the need for that kind of thing in Australia, particularly to support women in business. And also how to say no. Are there any tricks there? And again, that might be a plug for our Women's Agenda Leadership Awards, because we'll share why you shouldn't say no to entering awards. So, women in sport. So at a time when much of men's sport is regularly afflicted by scandal, which might be a bit of an understatement, but our female sports stars are gaining a little more prominence, and I've seen 2017 really described as the year that women's sport really started to take off and take absolute prominence, and it was the biggest year for sport. We saw so many wonderful things there. We can also look at the Matildas, which look in for a real chance at the 2019 Soccer World Cup, which is really exciting. But in the AFLW, which again, after a fantastic launch season in 2017, in which more than 25,000 people turned up for the inaugural game, after organisers had to shift where the location of that game because of the interest and the appeal in the game. So there's now a proposal to cut the 2019 AFLW season to just 6 games, while adding additional teams, meaning not all teams will actually play each other, and that's compared to 23 rounds in the men's game. So, Georgie, you've written a great article about this today, and a fantastic interview in there as well, but tell us what is going on here.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to say at the outset that at this point, the AFL hasn't made an official decision about what it will do. But it is clear that one of the proposals under consideration is shortening the season. And look, there's been a lot of discussion about why this is, and I think it's probably fair to say that, the commercial realities are probably one factor, definitely. But I think what's really disappointing about that, and I spoke to Susan Alberti today, who was on the sort of steering committee before the AFLW launched, and she's sort of a stalwart in the AFL community, and she said, you absolutely cannot expect for this to be profitable within just 2 years. You think about how long the men's game has been around and how long it had to develop the audience that it had and to have the media rights that it has. The launch of the women's competition could not have gone better. In terms of the sort of number of women that are interested in playing, the number of girls that have started playing at, AFL and Auskick, the number of spectators that are coming to games, it's been incredible. When the games have been televised, they've had terrific audiences. And I mean, I think, when I spoke to Susan today, she sort of said for her, the thing that is so disheartening is it feels like she's been fighting, she feels like, for 60 years to give women the same right to play the game they love as men. And 2017 absolutely felt like a watershed moment, and that it was a really significant change. And so now, I mean, even that it's being contemplated that cutting the competition is a viable alternative.
If anything, you think could be extending it at this point now. So
well, exactly, because I mean, some of the sort of more prominent AFL female stars have come out speaking, but as Susan said, and this is probably not hard to understand, for the less prominent players, they're in a position where they don't want to get people offside, so they can't speak out. The really high-profile players who have spoken out have said this is so incredibly disappointing, because the women who are playing in these competitions are already usually holding down full-time jobs in addition to the training that they're doing. They put so much into this. To do that for 6 games in an entire season is just ridiculous. Why would you sort of do that? And then what is the flow-on effect there? What message are we sending to the young girls and young women who have, particularly in the last 2 years, become fascinated with this game and are sort of dreaming of the potential for them to have careers in the game, whether it's as a player, as a spectator, as a in sports administration, any of those options. The idea that the game would be cut short, I think, is so demoralising.
To say you're only going to get 6 games. And you're right, these women do put so much into this. And they do, some of them move from interstate, some of them move from overseas back to Australia to take place. Some of them give up other sports and other things. And like you say, they're doing this training on top of full-time jobs because the pay just isn't there.
No, not. I mean, they are being paid, but it is very minimal, in most cases it is fairly nominal. And the idea is, at the time when this launched, and I spoke to players about it then, and the message was absolutely, we are in this for it to grow. We know that we're not launching right now in 2017 with the best pay conditions that we're going to get. But the idea was that if you invest in the competition and it grows, then obviously the viability of that as a career grows, the remuneration grows, and then you have a whole generation of new athletes. And I can't actually quite fathom that it's on the table.
So it is a proposal. So what's the next step? What happens now?
Well, the CEO, Nicole Livingstone, has said that that they haven't made any decisions yet. But so I don't actually know what the other proposals that they are considering are. But my understanding from the people that I've spoken to is that it doesn't look good. A lot of people think that this probably will happen, which is.
At the same time that some of the men are calling for their season to be shortened, their season of 23 rounds to be shortened.
Yeah, well, because, you think about it, these are really physical games. 23 rounds is a huge, that's a really long season. And a lot of those men are apparently, they've been polled recently, and most of them want it cut back. And so it seems like the really obvious solution there is you've got these women who are chomping at the bit. They want to play more, and the thing is, the more they play, the more visibility they have, then the more likely it is to become commercially viable because when people are watching, that's when the opportunities arise. So it seems to me the obvious solution would be to cut the men's season and give the extra games to the women.
Yeah, exactly. So Anne-Marie, are you a sports fan?
I've only just recently joined the Swans, so that's my first foray into football. Other than soccer, because I grew up, of course, around soccer. But what Beleaguer's belief is that the AFL does need a better reputation all round. And I think by focusing a bit more on women's games, on letting them shine a little bit, giving the guys a bit of a break, I know the injuries lead to later life struggles for a lot of older sports people. They find it difficult to find work. They have injuries that disable them. So I think for all those reasons it would be a really great thing all round, especially for the reputation of AFL, to let's focus a bit on women's sport now and give the women an opportunity to shine. And I have seen the Matildas, they are outstanding. So I want to see more.
Yeah,
more
exactly. And you'd also think that some of these codes would see it as a bit of a competition at the moment. I would have thought, with the NRL, with the women's game in the NRL, AFL, cricket's doing really well, women's cricket's doing fantastic at the moment.
Well, it's also the case that in rugby union, it's the women's team that has been it's been the only part of the code that is actually growing in terms of commercial return, but also the number of people playing. There's this huge growth market, and I think you'd have to be living under a rock at the moment to not recognise that there is a real movement around women, not just women in sport, but as Susan Alberti said to me today, and I've seen she has said this to other media publications as well, but the rise of women's AFL is not actually just about football. It's not just about sport. It transcends all of that, and it translates into this new world where there aren't the same limits on what women can do, and I think it's that big picture that I think the AFL was so clever to tap into when it brought forward the launch of the AFL Women's League, because it actually brought it forward by 3 years. And I think at the moment there is such an appetite. I think I agree with you, Anne-Marie, the role models in female sport, mostly by virtue of the fact that they're not paid hundreds and thousands of dollars, so they don't have the ability to go out and, create some of the controversy that we see some of the younger male athletes, the trouble that they get into. Women don't have the time to do that because they're working full time as well as, training around the clock. Often they have children. Their lives are so full and they're getting paid not enough money to have any time off. So they stay out of trouble.
Yes.
And I just think it would be madness not to capitalise on that. And really push
and give the guys a break.
Let them
have a break. Exactly. Give the women the platform and let's have more role models, because I probably didn't get into sport because there just weren't the role models at the time. I mean, I grew up in the 70s here in Australia, and, soccer, it's because it was a family thing. But I did notice the last few games that I've been to for the Swans, it's very family oriented and it's very diverse.
Yes, and that is one of the things about the AFL, and I have been told this, I don't know if it's specifically true or not, but my understanding is that the AFL, more than any other sport, has got a completely equal split of men and women who go to games and watch it. And I mean, that was another point someone has made to me, that by limiting the women's competition, you actually risk alienating a really big part of your spectators. And not just spectators, the people who might decide, what's our family doing this weekend? Do I want to buy tickets to the AFL? Well, actually, do I? If they're not going to actually support, women in the way that they were going to. So
that's why, again, I just think all these different codes should see the opportunity in trying to be the most appealing regarding the women's game and regarding getting women involved as players, not just as spectators, because all that translates into what your daughters might see, and therefore their interest in it and their interest in wanting to attend these games.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
So we should move on. Completely different topic, but at the moment just 4% of VC capital goes towards women. But research has found that women-led businesses do deliver greater returns for their investors than men. So women entrepreneurs also just make up a tiny portion of those covered in the mainstream media. And a significant portion of female small business owners do not pay themselves anything like a market wage, if they're actually paying themselves anything at all. So we see a number of options that are coming up to help. And I know that we've talked previously in the studio about She Starts, which comes out of Blue Chile, which selects a cohort of 10 female entrepreneurs each year to help accelerate their business. But Anne-Marie, you've recently become involved in a new one that's just launched in Australia being the 4th country to do this.
Yes.
Which sounds really interesting, and like a lot of people can also get involved.
Yes, so I love this. This is CEO World, brought to Australia by Julie Trell, who's the CEO of Muridi. And it was basically speaking to that issue. We know that there's a bunch of women that want to start their businesses. They're in fact doing it. They're sacrificing a lot. But where the rubber doesn't hit the road at the moment is the investment. So CEO World started in the United States with an epic goal. And the goal is to have 1 million activators that produce 10,000 women-led ventures and to establish a $1 billion perpetual fund.
Okay, so let's talk about activators, because it's not as easy as just signing up to be an activator. You're an activator, right?
I'm a super activator in Australia, which is very
activator.
Cool.
Yeah. Do I get to be an activator just because I'm sitting next to you?
Yes, everyone. Well, we need everyone.
You might need a bit of cash. I think that's the aim of the game.
Sorry, that's
so the cash
not my strong suit.
From memory was about $1,100 or $1,200, and I think a very small portion of that goes to the US to support the movement, and we get all of the materials. That's like everything that they've been building up for the last few years for CEO World, so classes, mentorship kits and information for women to start their own businesses is all part of that. And like I did think twice when it came to pushing that button, but I looked at that screen and I thought, $1,100 or $1,200 is not huge when I split it across a year. And when I started to think that I want to make sure that more diverse women get access to this fund, so women from Indigenous cultures, women from different ethnic backgrounds, that I would have to walk the talk and not just go, yeah, isn't this great? You should all get involved. But rather, I'm involved. I've put my money where my mouth is. And I do want to shout out to Michaela Jade, who wrote a tweet saying, I can't afford it, but I can't afford not to do this to ensure that there are more regional Aboriginal women entrepreneurs that get a look in.
Yeah.
So that's why, for me, it's so exciting. For me, it's a grassroots movement. It's from the ground up. You can be involved at the fringes, like as in not have to put up money and still be involved in supporting the women, or you can get involved with that small proportion of 1,200. We had our first hookup in Australia with the team overseas this week, and what we decided is that we're going to ask people if they can put an extra bit of money, then it can help women, say in rural or remote areas that might only have $200 but still want to be involved. So we will supplement or subsidise that amount. So I love things like this because it's about people, and it's not about what position you hold in the startup world right now. It's about whether or not you believe that you want to be a part of something that supports more women to get access to the education, the networks, the mentors, and ultimately the finance, which is the real thing.
So is that so as an activator, is it more about accessing the resources, or is it about putting money? So you're building a fund, is that what it is?
Yeah.
And how do they select who that fund goes to?
So that's what we're going to be working through.
So you all get a vote, you all get a say on
everybody's
that.
going to get a vote, and there'll be a process that we'll be looking at to apply that. But in an ideal world, people will apply and people will be selected. Yeah. But I know from the women that are involved, like Michaela, like Julie Trell, like Annie Parker, like Sally Ann Williamson, and so many others, that we will hunt down the women that don't get the fund. If we think that we can help them, we will help them.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's what I like about this particular movement as opposed to many others that are around. It's about putting your money where your mouth is. It's about being collaborative in supporting women, and whether women get access to the fund or not is irrelevant to me. I want to network them into the ecosystem and help them get access to customers at the end of the day.
Yeah. I like that it's a bit of an entry point to investing, because we talk about there's one hand women are not getting the investment, but there's also that we don't have enough women investors, probably for obvious reasons. We just don't have the money. And so the thought of being an investor just is off the chart of a different world, I think, for most of us. Whereas this is an entry point. I mean, it's not an entry point for everyone, but it might be an entry point for people who love the idea of trying to get involved in something like this, but would never be able to go and invest in these things themselves.
And to be honest, I would never have called myself an investor. Like, I invest my time in startups, but not money, because I don't have a lot of money. But like I said, I distributed it through a 12-month process, and, you know, not that I want to promote the idea, but I do smoke occasionally, so that would be no cigarettes, and then I can support a woman do something for future generations, and I think that's far more important than me having a cigarette once a week or whatever, which are now very, very expensive. So it's about, you know, working that stuff out. But in all seriousness, I'm excited that people like Michaela made that decision, because it makes me feel stronger in being able to be a part of a network of not just white Anglo women that support it, but like all different kinds of women. I met a young woman through LinkedIn the other day, Sarah Sahyun, Lebanese background, really excited. She reached out because I posted something about CEO World, and she said, well, I don't know that I can invest, but I would really love to be a part of it. So I'll bring her along on Friday night. So Friday night we're having a meetup at the Cuban. If anybody's interested, it's on Eventbrite under CEO World. And that's an opportunity to meet the other women and to start understanding how much of a role that you can play, even if you can't be an investor.
Great. Okay. I should say Friday night, so that's Friday, that's August, just because people do listen to these podcasts at different times. It is August the 10th, because I can say it's August the 8th because it is Women's Agenda's birthday today. So we have been around for 6 years.
Yes, and I think you are due a very big congratulations for that, because you have been at Women's Agenda for all 6 of those years.
Thank you. I wasn't actually going for that, but thank you very much. I don't know. I mean, I might, Georgie, on the subject of, well, we could say entrepreneurs or anything that you want. What would you say that has really changed in the past 6 years? Because you've been a part of Women's Agenda for much of that time as well.
I think the really big change is, and I actually just saw just before we started this podcast, I saw someone had tweeted and just sort of said, Women's Agenda was ahead of its time. And I do genuinely believe that, because I think you could now say that there is momentum and interest in the subjects that we write about daily, in terms of the role that women play in Australia, whether it's in business, whether it's in workplaces, in families, across the board. And I think there is a different appetite for these sorts of conversations and this type of content than there was particularly when I joined.
Yeah, and even when I look back at some of the content that we did in the early years and how we positioned ourselves, we did try to position a lot more in, and because we thought we really needed to do this, we did try to position ourselves more. We'd do a bit of kind of work, fashion and things like that, and a bit more travel and a bit more lighter subjects, as well as some of the media stuff that we were doing. And I think that we know, we can still do a bit of the lighter stuff, but we know that there's enough traction in that really solid, smart content that we're putting out, some of that journalism that goes out every day.
And I think, if we had a huge team, then we could, if we were published by a really big company, if we had a huge team, maybe we would have more diverse content, and we could do sort of fashion and lifestyle. But I think the way it is, there's so much content out there for travel and for lifestyle, and that's not for us. We know what our audience, we know what our purpose is, and it is in the sort of championing women in all of the different ventures that they're in, and a variety of women, not just we're certainly not just about executives, and we're certainly not just about entrepreneurs, and we're not just about white Anglo women, but I think that I think it's an amazing platform to have been involved in, and I think you do an amazing job running it.
Well, thank you. And you do an amazing job editing it. So, and that absolutely wasn't where I was heading. But we will move on to the next topic, which is about saying no.
Yes.
So, and I wanted to address this just because we have published a piece as part of our playbook that we're doing with Charles Sturt University, which is a supporter of the Women's Agenda Leadership Awards. And so every couple of weeks we're putting out a new piece of this playbook that really looks at an aspect of your career for emerging leaders. So this week we are looking at the idea of saying no and assessing opportunities, and you can go back and find some of the other things that we've done in the previous weeks. It's quite easy to go back on those stories, and we'll end up packaging this all together as a full playbook. So saying no, are you any good at saying no, Georgie? I feel you are.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I think out of necessity.
You're sensible with these things. You understand your time and what you can do. And
that's very generous of you to say that. I don't necessarily think that's true, and I think you probably get enough texts from me or emails from me saying, "Oh my God, what am I doing? I've committed to this XYZ," and I think it's definitely something I've got better at. Necessity helps. I think for example, over the last maybe 2 months, we have had basically no help on the home front, which is not usually how our household works, and it has just meant that my time has shrunk, because basically I've really only got most days from 9 until about 2:45 to get everything done. And so that has meant for this particular 2 months I haven't really been able to say yes to anything in addition to.
But did you know that from the outset? Did you know that 3 months ago when you needed to say no to things? Because that's often when the invitations
No, I didn't.
happen.
And to be fair, there are things that have come up that I'm still, that I've made work. But I certainly, you would be in the same position that I am. It's quite common. People do ask a lot, and I want to help. If I could write 1,500 stories every week about the different businesses that people are doing and about all of the issues that matter, I would do that, but I just don't have the time. And so I do have to be selective about what I do. And I try to be really honest with people. If and sometimes you get invited to do something and it sounds really good, but then when I actually stop and think, okay, how much time will that actually take? And if I do that calculation and I think this is going to take more than a half day, particularly if it's midweek and there's kids pick up or there's kids activities in the mix, I just think I can't commit to that, not at this point. The cost in terms of time for me is too great.
Yes, exactly. So Anne-Marie, it is a fine balance, because at some point in your career, and we've all been there, we've had to say yes to a lot of things as well, and that's been really great for us. But how have you learnt to say no? How do you do it? Do you do it?
Very hard. So I've been a freelancer all my working life, and so there's I think a guttural reaction when you're a freelancer to say yes to everything, because you're so scared that, oh my God, like I finish this contract in 2 weeks. If I don't have that next thing lined up, then I'm really stuffed. So there is that propensity.
There's the financial FOMO, and then often there's the other side of FOMO as well. So
often, like especially when I started the last 4 years, when I came into the tech startup world, I mean, I was Miss Do Anything for free. And it was actually a very good friend of mine and a probably reluctant mentor, Gavin Heaton, that started to say to me, "You're not still doing all that stuff for free, are you?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, no, it's really great and it's so important." And he's like, "You have to eat. Like you have to stop and prioritise the stuff that is paying you so that you've got an income.
Yes.
And then, obviously you'll always do free stuff." So probably the last 12 months I've really ground down around that. And the analogy of the aeroplane and the mask coming on you is absolutely brilliant for women in particular.
Yes.
That your instinct is to save everybody else before you save yourself, but the reality is if you don't save yourself first, you won't be saving anyone. So that's what I'm learning slowly, that there'll always be stuff I do for free because I love it. And for me, what's always been important in my role in the startup sector is not to be a startup, but to support and give weight to the startups that are doing social impact work or social enterprise. So I love that role and I'll always do it. But I have gotten a lot more hardcore around making that when somebody rings you and they go, "Oh, we've got this great conference," and so you're looking it up online and you can see everyone's paying to attend the conference, and then they're like, "Yeah, no, but we have no budget for you." And I say, well, then it will cost me. And that's what women actually have to realise, that if you say yes, right, that's a cab fare that you're paying to get to that venue. It's 5 hours out of your day that nobody's going to pay you for, and then so you're actually paying them to have the privilege to speak at their conference.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Once
You've got to put an hourly rate on your time, and you also need to assess how many hours are involved, because it's easy to go, "Oh, that's 2 hours out of my day, I can do that." But when you factor in the emails, when you factor in the conference call that will happen,
the preparation, it is. Yeah. It's a lot bigger.
Yeah. And it also speaks to the idea that, sure, everybody wants me because I've done 30 years in a range of things that I've got a lot to talk about. But what you're paying me for is not for that 5 minutes or 2 hours. It's actually for that 30 years breadth of experience that I can bring to speaking at an event. So it's very, very tricky. I did really enjoy seeing that this morning, that Charles Sturt University's putting out this...
So we put it out, and they've supported.
It's part of
they've
supported it.
I
love it,
with us.
And I think it is really important that we get more and more tools like that out there, because I'm 52 now and I wish I'd known we'd had this conversation 20 years ago, just so that it could be at the back of my mind as I embark on this journey.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to get, so in our line of work, being journalists, that's, but also not necessarily being always available journalists that some journalists are always available for. So we have to be really strict on, it's not just the speaking at events, but it's also the attending things.
Yes.
I'm at a point where I just don't attend anything out of at night, and I feel so boring, but I just think I've got young kids, I'm trying to run a business, I'm trying to do all these things, and it's just not realistic, and it makes me exhausted, and it means I don't sleep very well, and it stuffs up my next day. And so it's just having those rules, and I think that isn't forever, that's for now. That's me saying no to a lot of things right now, which I know, and I hope at least, will change at some point in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I go through phases like that where it depends on what is happening in the big picture of your life. Because the other thing is, as anyone who has got kids of any age knows, or even if you don't have kids, but things are not always equal. So, if you've got a time with a toddler who's not sleeping for whatever reason, your capacity is reduced. If you've got a child who's having problems at school and they're having a tricky time, being at home every night or every afternoon is actually really important. And I think you're constantly making those judgment calls. And I think I recognise things, it's not forever. I haven't done any nighttime things for ages for that reason, just because it hasn't fitted in. And I think, it is, you've kind of got to just look big picture and think, what is the cost to me of doing this? And not just, there is often a financial cost if you're doing things for free. And I also do come back to instinct, which I know is something you and I have talked about, and we have different views on that. But I sort of, if there's something that I immediately think I absolutely need to give this my support, I will make it happen. And then when it comes around, it's not something that I'm going to resent. I get into difficulty when I say yes to everything, and then when it comes around, I'm really unhappy with myself for not having said, actually, this doesn't work for me.
Exactly.
And I think you have this real fear of missing out, like you really do, especially as a woman, and people are saying to you, oh, you have to go, otherwise you'll be forgotten. Do you know what? No one forgets you. When you have an impact on people's lives because of the work that you do, we're not on one platform. Like, we may go to events, but we write, we tweet, we have a presence on social that is beyond our physically having to attend everything. And I was that person for 4 years where I did attend the opening of a window, and because I was scared. I was, I'm going to miss out on the AI talk or whatever. but frankly, a
lot of these talks are also online. You can spend the hour doing the research and reading and finding other ways to get this. And a lot of the speakers that are at these events as well, you can also, particularly the really big ones, you can go and find their TEDx talks. You can access them. If you're not in a place or a position to be able to attend these things in person, you'll find other avenues for
accessing
and
can I also say that what's really present to me now, probably because I'm going through it, but aging parents. People have completely bypassed that. Our generation are dealing with children and aging parents, and
the sandwich generation,
the real sandwich generation that the boomers pretend that they were, but they really weren't. I know a lot of my friends who are a bit younger than me are looking after their grandparents because the parents aren't well enough or live too far away or whatever. So we've got caring responsibilities that aren't necessarily just about your nuclear family as well.
All right, we should wrap up. Okay, we usually end on a recommendation. Any books, movies, television shows, something?
Can I do something a little bit different this week?
Yes.
I have been noticing on social media that obviously there's been a lot of attention being paid to the fact that a lot of Australia is in a horrific drought at the moment. And one of the little things that I have seen suggested on Instagram that I've taken on board is clicking on the links of small businesses in rural and regional Australia that sell. There are these amazing little boutiques out there that sell gorgeous earrings, they sell gorgeous kids' presents, and there's just been a couple of things where I've thought I've needed a wedding present for some friends, and I've needed 2 birthday presents for kids, like for birthday parties for kids. And I thought that's one little way I can support some businesses in regional and rural Australia.
So how would you recommend we find some of these?
So I would say 2 bloggers in particular, Baby Mac and Styling You, who are 2, one's in Queensland, one is in New South Wales, but they both have quite a big following, and they have both posted on their blogs links to a whole lot of small businesses that are selling awesome things. And I think it's just one little way that city people like me, rather than going to a big shopping centre and spending my money in the big businesses, the money I need to spend I may as well spend on a cute little business. And frankly, if I was inclined to do a little bit of shopping, there's some lovely things.
Well, I might do mine on the back of that. Has a link. So we are recording this podcast, as we always do, at Vivo Cafe on George Street. So it is a small business Vivo Cafe. This is part of Eagle Wave Studio. Now, it's owned by Angela Fathulkas, who we've had on the podcast a couple of times and who also runs the Eagle Wave Studio. So she's recently announced that this cafe that she runs with her brother will be closing after 16 years. So I think we should do a shout out for their final day, which is on the 24th of August. And so if you come along for breakfast, you can come along for breakfast, brunch, coffee, whatever it is that you need to do during the day in order to get some food and some drink in you. All the proceeds will go to drought-affected farmers. There's a link. It's a small business link, and also a link to those in drought-affected parts of New South Wales at the moment. Anne-Marie, did you have a recommendation?
I just want to say that I support both of those ideas, and I will do a shout out for the Country Women's Association. I think they are the most dynamic, disruptive bunch of women I've ever met in my life. They hold the country together, and they do a whole bunch of things, like they do support the farmers and their families. But, you know, if someone's in hospital, one of the Country Women's Association will make sure that they go and they make meals for the family, or they'll take them to visit the family in hospital and things like that. So just a shout out generally to their work, and I'll be hunting them down and seeing what they're up to around the farmers at the moment.
All right, awesome. Good recommendations there. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.